Many of the most influential minds in history shared a hidden habit that fueled their work. Sigmund Freud, for example, built entire schools of thought while maintaining a very specific discipline over his physical impulses. Decades later, technological visionaries like Steve Jobs utilized this same practice to achieve the extreme, laser-like focus required to build a global empire. The practice extends into the physical realm as well. The most dominant athletes in history, including Muhammad Ali, relied on this same internal restriction to maintain their competitive edge. This shared discipline is semen retention. It involves either complete abstinence or the technical separation of an orgasm from the physical release of ejaculation. For these high achievers, this discipline provided the physiological baseline required to outperform their peers and dominate their respective fields. Modern society programs men to view ejaculation as the ultimate goal of intimacy, the natural finish line and reward of the experience. This raises a difficult question. Why would billionaires and world champions intentionally avoid a biological drive that feels like a necessity? Ancient cultures viewed what we call a release as a catastrophic loss of a finite internal resource. Reframing the physical release as a biological cost rather than a reward changes the entire calculation of how a man manages his potential. Traditional Chinese medicine centers on Jing, the foundational life force that fuels the human body. Ancient texts argue semen contains the highest concentration of this Jing. Therefore, frequent ejaculation was believed to directly accelerate aging and physical fatigue. Ayurvedic medicine in ancient India held a similar view, treating semen as a precious, highly refined asset within the body's internal economy. The texts describe a specific exchange rate, claiming it takes exactly 80 drops of blood to manufacture just a single drop of semen. Across distinct civilizations, preserving this fluid was seen as a direct requirement for maintaining intellect, physical strength, and long-term vitality. In the early 20th century, Napoleon Hill theorized that unspent sexual desire is the most powerful driver of human willpower and imagination. Modern research now backs this theory with physiological data, showing how retention actually shifts the chemical balance within the brain. This chart illustrates the shift in internal chemistry. Notice the steep drop in dopamine, the driver of addictive behaviors, and prolactin, the hormone responsible for post-climax lethargy. At the same time, levels of testosterone, androgen receptors, and serotonin spike dramatically upward. By elevating motivation and the willingness to take calculated risks, these biological shifts create a direct pathway to higher productivity and, eventually, greater professional and financial success. Harnessing this energy doesn't require a life of total celibacy. It is possible to maintain a connection with a partner without losing the internal momentum. This is achieved through a dry orgasm, a technique that relies entirely on isolating and controlling the pelvic floor muscles. You train these muscles through Kegel exercises, practicing the act of stopping the flow of urination to build physical resistance. During intimacy, flexing these strengthened muscles right before climax allows a man to block the physical release while still experiencing the neurochemical rush of the orgasm. Mastering this technique allows a man to secure the deep connection and pleasure of sex without losing the energetic momentum needed for his professional and personal goals. Conserving this energy leads to increased stamina, higher sperm motility, and the ability for a man to experience multiple orgasms in a single session. Beyond these physical gains, Eastern traditions describe a spiritual shift. They refer to Kundalini, a creative energy residing at the base of the spine. Redirected sexual energy causes this Kundalini to rise through the spine to the brain, which practitioners believe heightens life purpose and mental clarity. Whether viewed through a microscope or a mystical text, this retained energy acts as a multiplier for a man's most critical relationships and ambitions. This brings us back to the historical titans. For inventors like Nikola Tesla, this unspent energy was the literal fuel for their worldly achievements. Semen retention focuses on transmuting a fleeting physical impulse into a source of enduring creative power. The momentary high of a physical release is replaced by a consistent internal engine of drive that powers a man's long-term ambitions. Mastering the body's most primal urge is the foundational step to taking total control of your life, your income, and your legacy. Many men operate under the assumption that their reproductive system runs on an endless supply. The common belief is that the tank is always full, and after it's emptied, the body instantly tops it right back off. But biologically, the fluid that actually leaves the body and the microscopic cells swimming inside of it are entirely different components. Because of how these systems operate, a man can easily produce a perfectly normal, high volume of fluid while simultaneously having a completely depleted actual sperm count. This happens because your body is running two completely separate biological assembly lines to manufacture these components, and they are operating at vastly different speeds. To understand the true metabolic cost of male reproduction, we have to completely separate the outer packaging from the cellular payload. Let's start here with the fast track. Your body can whip up a fresh batch of seminal fluid in about 48 hours. Looking at this schematic of the reproductive tract, we can see exactly where this happens. The prostate gland and the seminal vesicles act as a quick mixing station. They combine water, fructose, and specialized enzymes to create a fluid that accounts for up to 90% of the total volume. Zooming in on this fluid mixture, you'll notice a lack of genetic material. On its own, this rapidly produced liquid has zero reproductive capability. It strictly serves as armor and fuel for the cells it will eventually carry. Because this high-volume liquid armor replenishes in just 2 days, it creates a dangerous biological illusion. You see a full tank, so you assume your entire reproductive system has fully recovered. The reality of the slow track, the creation of the payload itself, is a much different story. Producing mature sperm cells takes roughly 3 months, and as this neural map shows, replacing those cells doesn't even start in the reproductive organs. The process requires a precise chemical command sequence that originates all the way up in the brain's hypothalamus. The brain releases specific hormonal signals, LH and FSH. We contract these signals as they travel the entire length of the bloodstream to reach specialized cells located deep inside the testes. Generating new sperm is never an isolated, localized reflex. It is a systemic, whole-body command that forces your entire endocrine system into action. Once that chemical signal arrives, stem cells inside the seminiferous tubules get to work. Through a rigorous cellular process called meiosis, these cells are forced to aggressively divide and have their DNA. These rapidly dividing cells are incredibly fragile. To protect them, the body locks them inside a biological vault called the blood-testes barrier, which completely blocks harmful bacteria and toxins from entering the chamber. Surviving inside this vault exacts a massive nutritional tax on your system. The dividing cells pull highly concentrated amounts of zinc to replicate their DNA, and they burn through selenium to fight off the toxic cellular waste generated by this extreme energy use. These cells are locked inside this protected incubation chamber for 64 to 74 days. After that, they are pushed into the epididymis for another 2 weeks of final maturation. That exhaustive 90-day timeline and the intense requirement for specific trace minerals form an inescapable biological speed limit. Your body simply cannot rush the creation of new life. If we zoom out from the microscopic level, we can view this entire process as a biological economy. And in this economy, your body operates on a strict budget of resources. You possess finite daily amounts of metabolic energy, glycogen, and vital minerals. This flowchart demonstrates exactly how that budget is spent. With frequent ejaculation, you force the body to siphon off its finite resources. Essential nutrients like zinc and selenium, along with general metabolic energy, are aggressively rerouted to constantly fund that 90-day reproductive assembly line. Continually prioritizing this cellular payload directly starves your other systems. It deprives your brain, your immune response, and your physical recovery of the exact metabolic jet fuel they need to function. The male reproductive system is not a bottomless well. It requires a massive metabolic investment. When you calculate the true cost of funding that 90-day cycle, it forces a strict reevaluation of how you manage and conserve your biological energy. Observe human behavior, the gathering of resources, pursuit of status, securing of territory, and you will find a single evolutionary imperative running the show: reproduction. Maintaining reproductive readiness is an expensive biological investment. It demands a massive, continuous supply of the body's physical and chemical energy just to remain prepared. Most individuals expend this potent, built-up biological energy through temporary physical release, frequently draining their own physiological reserves. Understanding this drive allows for the redirection of our own evolutionary programming. We can intercept this biological fuel and repurpose it for higher achievement. History's most influential thinkers treated sexual energy as a critical biological resource to be carefully conserved. Philosophers and creators such as Aristotle, the great thinker Plato, and Leonardo da Vinci recognized the immense physiological cost of this drive and structured their lives to protect it. They practiced sexual transmutation, the deliberate redirection of primal energy into their specific fields of genius, much like Isaac Newton in physics or Beethoven in his musical compositions. This practice offered a calculated method to monopolize their body's energy for intellectual creation. The origins of this practice trace back to the Hellenistic period, where the union of Greek and Egyptian mystery schools birthed the philosophy of alchemy. The foundational text of this era, the Emerald Tablet, documented the earliest principles of transmutation. Modern culture often frames alchemy as the pursuit of physical lead-to-gold conversion, focusing on the literal tools of a laboratory. Early Greek philosophers used these terms as a biological metaphor. Within this framework, lead represents base, unrefined biological desire, while gold is the resulting intellectual power generated when that desire is conserved. These ancient alchemists served as early behavioral scientists, mapping the transformation of human energy. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras observed that seminal fluid and brain tissue share a substantively similar chemical composition. Chemistry confirms this. Both brain and reproductive tissues rely on high concentrations of sodium, magnesium, and lecithin. Crucially, they share phosphorus, a reactive element essential for the nervous system. Alchemists called this element the philosopher's stone, recognizing the exact properties we associate with phosphorus today. Conserving reproductive fluids protects the body's phosphorus supply, leaving a biological surplus for the brain to use in generating cognitive fire. The brain transforms energetic states, starting in the amygdala, where anger originates. This triggers a fight-or-flight response, flooding the body with adrenaline for immediate action. However, this energy can be intercepted and routed into the prefrontal cortex, transforming into a productive, long-term drive. Sexual arousal follows these same survival pathways. Transmutation applies this exact redirection, hijacking a potent hormonal state and rerouting it away from its default release. Eastern traditions independently mapped this biological economy, using concepts like virya in Ayurveda and qi in Taoism. Texts like the Tao Te Ching documented this internal energy flow thousands of years before the arrival of modern neuroscience. These traditions describe a specific mechanic. When seminal energy is conserved from physical release or lustful overthinking, it travels upward through the nervous system. By identifying the central nervous system as a physical conduit, these practices convert reproductive resources into mental willpower and focus. This practice functions as an advanced system of biological resource management. You can choose to spend your most potent evolutionary chemicals on temporary release or conserve them to align with the creative rhythm of the universe. Within your closed biological system, you determine whether your primal drive fuels a moment of pleasure or a lifetime of self-actualization. Meet Jensen. In his early 20s, he worked in finance, but felt like he was constantly running on empty. He described the sensation as literally drying up. His attention was scattered, and socially he felt too paralyzed to even speak to women. Jensen's lethargy was a direct result of his habits. Every time he sought a quick physical release, his body was forced into a massive expenditure of biological resources to replenish the loss. This creates a specific neurochemical tax. Excessive sexual overstimulation floods the brain with dopamine, but over time, this flood causes the receptors to degrade and short-circuit. Eventually, the brain loses its ability to feel motivated by anything else. The physical drain is just as severe. The body loses crucial reserves of B12, zinc, and keratin, while simultaneously spiking a hormone called prolactin. High prolactin levels are directly linked to extreme listlessness and fatigue. Jensen was trapped in a biological loop. His lack of physical restraint was actively bankrupting his daily vitality, leaving him in a state of constant semen deficit that made progress in any other area of his life impossible. Desperate to clear the brain fog, Jensen began studying tantric and Taoist practices. He realized he didn't have to be celibate, he just had to stop overindulging. He discovered techniques to cultivate sexual energy without the depleting act of ejaculation. To see if he could actually regain his energy, he set a high bar for himself. He committed to 30 straight days of absolute semen retention, sealing shut a drive that had previously controlled him. This 30-day challenge was more than a trial of abstinence. It was a calculated intervention designed to halt the neurochemical depletion and allow his body to finally recover its lost nutrients. The first few weeks were a struggle of pure willpower. Denying a habit wired into the brain's reward centers caused intense withdrawal, but Jensen stayed the course until his biology began to pivot. By stopping the constant overfiring of reward centers, Jensen's dopamine receptors regenerated. A steady flow of neurochemicals replaced erratic spikes, returning his baseline motivation. With prolactin suppressed, his testosterone levels rebounded, spiking by 45% in a single week. The energy shift was night and day. He went from needing several cups of coffee just to feel alert to waking up naturally with soaring energy. He no longer felt like he was dragging himself through his daily tasks. This established the first virtuous loop. Biological discipline leads to hormonal healing, which in turn generates the surplus energy required to maintain further self-control. Jensen had reached a state of biological surplus. Because his body was no longer desperately trying to replenish a constant deficit, it could finally redirect resources toward daily maintenance and repair. Essential elements like zinc and phosphorus, previously lost, were now redirected upward. These nutrients acted as fuel for brain function and cellular repair. The cognitive result was immediate. The chronic brain fog and scatterbrained nature he suffered from since his teenage years vanished entirely. He channeled this mental clarity into his passion for music. He found he could maintain deep focus for hours at a time, finishing creative projects that he previously lacked the mental endurance to complete. Controlling this primal urge effectively reallocated his biological budget toward a higher tier of creative focus and mental endurance. Jensen also experienced a profound emotional shift. He shed his lifelong shyness and finally became comfortable in his own skin. This confidence was the direct psychological byproduct of his optimized biology. His normalized dopamine levels and peak testosterone removed the feelings of guilt and frustration that had previously clouded his self-image. Jensen noticed he was standing taller and maintaining eye contact naturally. This change in his nonverbal presence shifted his social interactions. He began to experience a new phenomenon where women sensed his aura of masculinity and approached him first. This external validation created a return cycle. Seeing his social success reinforced his internal self-esteem, grounding him even more deeply in his practice. The loop shows that internal neurochemical optimization engineers external social success, which then provides the motivation to keep the internal system healthy. At the end of the 30 days, Jensen realized the physical perks, like his deeper voice and better hair, were actually secondary. The real shift was psychological. Successfully denying his biological craving for a month provided Jensen a critical data point. His mind was capable of overriding his body's intense demands. This momentum carried over into every other habit. He used the willpower he had cultivated to quit smoking marijuana, to stop drinking, and transform his physical fitness. This strategy of redirecting biological energy into professional drive is shared by some of history's most productive minds. Steve Jobs famously utilized retention to maintain his visionary edge and professional intensity. Elite athletes have also long relied on this biological surplus. Fighters like Muhammad Ali purposefully avoided sexual activity before a bout to ensure they entered the ring with maximum power and focus. Controlling the internal biology creates a template for discipline. For Jensen, mastering this one drive was the signal that he could finally steer the rest of his life. To create a healthy reproductive system, the male body has to constantly balance a precise biological cocktail. It requires exact levels of fluid volume, dense cell concentration, and coordinated movement. To maintain that balance, the World Health Organization sets the healthy human baseline at a minimum of 1.5 milliliters of fluid per ejaculation. For decades, the assumption in traditional medical circles was that regular clearing of the reproductive tract was necessary to keep cells from degrading. The idea was that frequent ejaculation kept the supply fresh. But recently, massive internet subcultures have taken the exact opposite approach. Millions of men are experimenting with indefinite, long-term abstinence, claiming that avoiding ejaculation for months on end is the path to peak physical and cognitive performance. So who actually has the science right? Does storing sperm in the reproductive tract ruin its quality over time? Or does holding on to it make the system stronger? The only way to find out is to look past the assumptions and map out the exact biological shifts that happen inside the male body during a prolonged clinical timeline of abstinence. Looking at this timeline tracking abstinence from day 0, the first change happens almost immediately. Within 24 hours, clinical studies show a spike in total semen volume. As it advances toward day 3, sperm concentration shoots upward right alongside that fluid volume. Then we have to measure what biologists call motility. This is the progressive driving force that allows sperm to actively navigate the harsh environment of the female reproductive tract and reach an egg. During this same 3-day window, clinical studies show that the total number of these highly active forward-moving cells increases substantially. The first 72 hours of abstinence act as a rapid biological restocking phase. The body is sharply elevating all the raw materials it needs for reproduction. As we move past those initial 3 days, the biology shifts away from rapid growth and enters a phase of high-level stability. This chart maps out a new metric, viability, which measures the percentage of living sperm. You can see the viability curve hits its apex around day 4 and stays perfectly steady through day 7. To maintain that stability, the body deploys a hidden protective mechanism. The seminal plasma floods with antioxidants, creating a chemical shield that actively defends the stored sperm from oxidative stress. While the reproductive cells are protected, a massive hormonal shift is happening simultaneously. Serum testosterone levels start a steady climb the longer the abstinence continues. And right here on the 7th day of abstinence, this chart overlay records the highest measurement. Serum testosterone levels reach 145% of the initial baseline. By maximizing both reproductive potential and internal hormonal drive, this 4 to 7 day window represents the absolute biological sweet spot for the male body. But look at what happens when this chart extends past day 7. The data forms a biological bell curve. Instead of an infinite upward trajectory, metrics start curving downward. Tracking specifically across days 9 and 10, the motile sperm line begins a measurable decline. As continuous abstinence drags on, the percentage of viable, living sperm drops right along with it. The aging cells degrade from overstorage. Leaving sperm trapped in the reproductive ducts for too long subjects them to oxidative stress, leading to increased DNA fragmentation. The human reproductive system is not designed to hoard its resources forever. Holding past the optimal peak causes the system to experience diminishing returns and cellular breakdown. We can see exactly how this biological curve translates to real-world outcomes when we look at actual conception rates. Retrospective clinical analyses show that couples achieve the highest rate of clinical pregnancy when the male follows an ejaculatory abstinence window of exactly 3 to 7 days. Short abstinence periods alter seminal proteins in a way that actively favors conception. The data proves that calculated, short-term intervals are vastly superior to long-term storage. These hormonal shifts impact the entire musculoskeletal system. Because testosterone drives the body's anabolic development, this 7-day peak accelerates the increase of strength and lean muscle mass in men who exercise. For men looking to maximize their biological potential, the research indicates a specific protocol. To optimize semen quality and testosterone output, the data points to a deliberate abstinence period of 3 to 7 days. Researchers investigating the life cycle of male achievement kept running into a specific pattern. It turns out the vast majority of men don't hit their defining professional stride until they reach their 40s or 50s. The data suggests a correlation with energy expenditure. In their 20s and 30s, these men were devoting massive amounts of their baseline focus to sexual indulgence. As they aged and redirected that attention toward other pursuits, they reached the professional milestones that had previously eluded them. This delay in success stems from the high biological price of the male reproductive system. Generating sperm requires an intense, constant supply of nutrients and raw metabolic energy. Prioritizing constant sexual release depletes the physical resources and life force required to build a business, master a skill, or sustain long-term ambition. This brings us to sexual transmutation, the deliberate decision to retain sexual energy rather than expending it. While procreation is a driving instinct for every species on Earth, humans possess a unique neurological loophole. Our capacity for abstract, symbolic thought allows us to reroute the energy meant for reproduction into higher-order endeavors. World champion athletes, tech billionaires, and Renaissance geniuses have utilized this exact practice as a foundational habit for centuries. By diverting your own biological resources, you can turn a base reproductive drive into the primary fuel for professional achievement. The physiological shift begins around the 2-week mark of strict retention. At this point, the body realizes that sperm is not being released, and it initiates a process to reabsorb it. The dense nutrients in sperm are broken down, recycled, and migrate upward to optimize the central nervous system. This triggers a hormonal cascade. Retaining semen sharply increases testosterone, triggering physical shifts, thicker hair, denser muscle mass, and improved skin tone. Through retention, you are recycling the body's most potent life-creating nutrients to physically and mentally refine your own system. The most significant impact occurs in the subconscious mind. When you stop ejaculating, your brain registers an evolutionary alarm, assuming you are failing to mate. To correct this, the brain forces a psychological shift by boosting your confidence, sharpening your focus, and reducing social anxiety in a desperate attempt to make you a more attractive prospective partner. This is exactly where the pivot occurs. Your brain generates a fierce, irresistible drive for reproduction, but you can choose to deny that instinct and direct that newfound motivation elsewhere. Former world heavyweight champion David Haye utilized this strategy before every fight. He would enforce strict retention for 6 solid weeks to build the pent-up energy needed to dominate his opponents in the ring. Steve Jobs applied this same principle to his intellectual pursuits. By practicing tantric retention and refusing to ejaculate, he captured that intense biological drive and aimed it at revolutionizing computer technologies. Transmutation takes millions of years of evolutionary drive and focuses it, like a laser, onto your professional ambitions. Channeling sexual energy heightens imagination, providing the mental clarity required to bring complex new ideas into reality. Michelangelo, arguably the most gifted artist in history, maintained a monk-like chastity throughout his life. He abstained from sex to ensure all his creative energy was funneled into his work. This redirected energy allowed him to produce an extraordinary volume of work. Beyond his sculptures, he painted the Sistine Chapel and planned St. Peter's Basilica, demonstrating the output of a man operating at full capacity. Resisting humanity's strongest natural desire builds a foundation of general self-discipline. In his research on the wealthiest individuals of the early 20th century, author Napoleon Hill dedicated an entire chapter to this phenomenon. He cited sexual transmutation as a vital first step for those seeking to accumulate massive wealth. Mastering the most primal biological urge provides the psychological framework needed to manage the high-stakes rigors of business or complex creative projects. This discipline clarifies romantic relationships. By removing the immediate cloud of lust, you can see a partner more clearly, allowing for long-lasting partnerships based on genuine compatibility. Ultimately, sexual energy is a raw resource. It is exactly like crude oil. In its raw, uncontained form, this energy is wasted or even destructive. But when disciplined and refined, it aggressively ignites into a high-efficiency fuel. By choosing to retain and refine this internal energy, you actively redirect your own evolutionary drive, generating the fuel required to become your most successful self. We live in an era where high-speed internet provides instant access to virtually limitless sexual content. Yet, paradoxically, we are seeing a severe, documented decline in the mental and physical health of young men. How exactly is a daily habit that most of society considers completely normal draining away their motivation, confidence, and physiological well-being? To figure that out, we have to strip away the old religious stigmas and schoolyard myths. No, masturbating won't make you go blind or grow hair on your hands. We need to look strictly at the clinical data. Because it is so highly normalized, it is easy to miss the fact that frequent consumption of digital pornography acts as a severe behavioral addiction. It actively rewires and hijacks the male biological reward system. Men today aren't experiencing a collapse of moral character. They are losing a very physical battle against a digital environment engineered to exploit their neurology. The scale of the issue becomes clear when we look at the largest internal survey ever conducted within the nofap community, a group originally formed by men attempting to quit internet pornography. 59% of surveyed users watched 4 to 15 hours of internet porn weekly. This behavior starts early. Over half developed heavy habits between ages 12 and 14, a critical neurological window. By adulthood, 80% report feeling unable to control their sexual desires. This lack of control quickly translates to intense physical isolation. Approximately half of the men surveyed were virgins, meaning their entire catalog of sexual experience came exclusively from solitary screen time. These numbers drag the conversation out of the realm of niche internet subcultures. We are looking at the footprint of a widespread, measurable public health crisis. The engine driving this widespread behavioral loop is a biological mechanism known as the Coolidge effect. Named after the 30th U.S. president, it describes a mammalian tendency to constantly seek out novel sexual partners to maintain arousal. Internet pornography artificially weaponizes this exact reflex. It provides an infinite, high-speed buffet of new partners, which trains the viewer's brain to require constant, escalating novelty just to achieve basic stimulation. As a direct result of this desensitization, nearly 2/3 of surveyed men reported their viewing tastes becoming progressively more extreme and deviant over time. This constant neurological bombardment eventually exhausts the body's physical hardware, hitting young men in what should be their physical prime, ages 27 to 31, exceptionally hard. Mapping physical health markers reveals intense sexual dysfunction. 34% suffer erectile dysfunction, and 19% experience premature ejaculation. It also causes severe emotional detachment. 1/4 of these men completely lose interest in physical intimacy with real-world partners. By repeatedly triggering the brain's pleasure centers in the same manner as drugs and other addictive substances, this cycle of overindulgence eventually bankrupts a man's physiological and psychological vitality. This is where the modern no-fap movement branches off from ancient practices like semen retention. While Taoist monks focused on conserving energy by avoiding ejaculation entirely, the primary goal here is eliminating the overindulgence of artificial digital stimulation. To break a behavioral addiction this deeply rooted, clinicians and community leaders prescribe a strict protocol known as hard mode. Hard mode consists of non-negotiable boundaries held for at least 90 days. 0 pornography, 0 erotic imagery, no masturbation, and no orgasms whatsoever. This systematic deprivation is required because the brain's reward circuitry has become calibrated to extreme, artificial levels of stimulation. Only a complete break from these habit triggers allows the foundation for a man to master his own desires. Surviving the first 30 days requires total environmental control. This means stripping your living space of triggers and installing strict digital blocking tools, sometimes requiring a friend to hold the password, to physically prevent a relapse during the intense initial withdrawal period. During days 30 to 60, physical energy begins returning in waves. It is critical to reinvest this surplus immediately into daily exercise, goal-oriented journaling, and building concrete, structured career or personal milestones. By the final stretch, days 60 to 90, the focus shifts outward. The goal is to reintegrate socially, building deep, genuine connections with friends and romantic partners without the pressure or expectation of sexual release. This 90-day protocol functions as a biological reset, engineering a deliberate environment where hijacked energy is systematically redirected into long-term personal growth. This chart shows the clinical recovery data from men who complete the reset. Here we see a direct comparison. Once they commit to ditching porn and masturbation, 60% of men report significant improvements in their sexual function. Alongside that physical healing, 67% experience a massive, self-reported surge in their daily physical energy and overall motivation. You are faced with a clear choice: between burning hours on 5-minute spurts of empty digital pleasure or conserving that drive to build profound, long-lasting, real-world achievements. True physical and mental vitality requires rejecting endless artificial stimulation. When you stop draining your energy into a screen, you finally have the biological currency needed to build a meaningful, deeply engaged life. Imagine experiencing the peak of sexual pleasure without losing your physical drive. Today, we're mapping out how to gain full control over your body and achieve a climax without ever ejaculating. The mechanics rely on a specific physical skill, isolating the muscles of your pelvic floor. By mastering this group, you can physically separate the sensation of an orgasm from the release of seminal fluid. This requires a commitment to a brief, daily conditioning routine and a strict protocol to follow during the moments before climax. By extending the duration of intimacy and removing the post-climax drain, you can focus entirely on the connection with your partner while keeping your personal energy levels high. This is your pelvic floor, also known as the Kegel muscles. In everyday life, this internal hammock of muscle is responsible for supporting your organs and controlling your biological waste functions. To locate them, imagine you are stopping urination midstream or preventing yourself from passing gas. When you apply that specific mental cue and squeeze, you are activating the Kegel muscles. When you perform this contraction correctly, you will feel a distinct internal lift deep within your pelvic region. It is easy to compensate with other muscles when you first try this. You must check yourself and ensure your buttocks, your abdominal muscles, and your thighs remain completely relaxed. As you hold this specific flex, check your breathing. You need to be inhaling and exhaling normally without holding your breath. Isolating this exact muscle group is your non-negotiable foundation. If your surrounding muscles tense up when you try to flex your pelvic floor, this technique will fail during intimacy. Your pelvic floor is just like any other muscle. To build enough strength to hold back an orgasm, it requires isolated, daily training. The conditioning protocol is simple. You squeeze and hold the Kegel muscle for a short burst, repeating this for 10 individual contractions. You need to complete this 10-set routine at least 3 times every single day. Because this flex is entirely internal, you can do this anywhere. You can practice while standing in line, walking, or sitting at your desk without anyone noticing. Warning tone. Be mindful of the instinct to hold your breath while you train. Force yourself to breathe steadily through each of the 10 contractions. Strict consistency with this routine is the only way to build your physical stamina. You have to train these muscles to lock down on command when they are under the pressure of sexual arousal. Once your daily practice is locked in, you can bring this skill into the bedroom. During the buildup of sexual arousal, your primary objective is profound physical relaxation. As arousal increases, actively monitor your body. Drop your shoulders, loosen your jaw, and make sure your legs and buttocks stay completely relaxed. To aid this relaxation, take long, deep breaths from your abdomen. This deliberately calms your nervous system and keeps tension from seizing your muscles. If the sensation gets too intense, hold perfectly still for a few moments. This prevents energy from building up exclusively in your pelvic region. This active relaxation protocol diffuses the intensity throughout your entire body. It prevents a premature climax and sets the baseline for absolute physical control. Eventually, you will reach the point of no return, the exact moment when a climax feels inevitable and the physical release is about to trigger. When you hit this edge, your first command is to immediately stop all stroking or thrusting. Second, open your eyes. This breaks the internal sensory feedback loop and brings your focus back to the present. Finally, squeeze your newly strengthened pelvic floor muscles just as you've practiced in your daily routine, and hold them tight. By clamping down internally, the physical ejaculation is blocked. The result is a highly pleasurable dry orgasm. While some apply physical pressure between the scrotum and anus to force a retrograde ejaculation, the internal Kegel squeeze is a superior method for keeping your energy flowing naturally. By executing this specific sequence, stopping movement, opening your eyes, and squeezing the pelvic floor, you experience the peak pleasure of a climax without sacrificing your physical energy. You now possess the exact physical toolkit needed to actively control your orgasms. Conditioning the pelvic floor takes time. Expect to practice daily for a few weeks before the technique feels natural during intimacy. Stay dedicated to your 3 daily sessions of contractions and the practice of relaxing your surrounding muscles. As your control sharpens, you will be able to sustain these experiences for as long as you and your partner desire, ending every encounter with your physical energy completely intact. When you have too much time on your hands, it's easy for your mind to wander. If you are practicing semen retention or just trying to build better habits, empty hours on the couch often trigger a need for comfort. That boredom can quickly pull you toward detrimental behavior or overwhelming physical urges. Just trying to suppress these thoughts usually backfires, leaving you feeling guilty or ashamed when the urges inevitably return. Instead of rejecting that natural energy, you need to actively redirect it into something productive. By the end of this video, we are going to build a complete, time-blocked daily schedule. This framework will help you eliminate the idle time where urges breed and intercept bad habits before they take root. This structured routine captures raw, unguided physical energy and channels it into a focused engine for personal growth and achievement. Let's start by looking at this daily planner and blocking out the critical first 3 hours of your day. Step 1 is a 6 a.m. wake-up, jumping straight into 30 minutes of meditation. This trains your mind to redirect wandering thoughts and actively grounds you in the present moment. At 6:30 a.m., we move to journal writing. Use this time to write down exactly what you are feeling. If you can interpret your emotions with words, you can identify your actual underlying needs. For instance, realizing you feel apprehensive means you need comfort, not necessarily physical stimulation. Once you accurately name those needs, you can find appropriate, healthy ways to fulfill them. This prevents you from automatically seeking out instant gratification to deflect feelings of vulnerability or fear. Next, at 7 a.m., get your body moving with a half hour of exercise. This releases endorphins, providing natural comfort and boosting energy reserves. Follow that up at 8 a.m. with basic hygiene and a healthy breakfast to set your physical baseline. Completing this specific sequence builds a layer of psychological armor. By the time you start your workday, you are grounded, energized, and self-aware before external stressors can even begin to test your resolve. From 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., your primary focus will be on your professional tasks. Because it is highly unlikely you'll maintain unbroken concentration for 8 hours, you need to schedule specific reset breaks throughout the day to combat mental wandering. When you feel your attention slipping, step away. Taking a short scheduled walk outside or having a healthy snack recharges your energy reserves. Changing your physical environment quickly resets your cognitive focus and helps lower any rising physical urges. What you eat during these breaks matters. Looking at this checklist, you'll see certain foods act as natural aphrodisiacs. If your goal is to manage physical desires, you need to avoid the left side of this list, which includes items like sugar, foods high in saturated fats, and alcohol. Instead, you should prioritize the right side of the list. These are anaphrodisiacs, foods that actively suppress your sex drive while keeping you healthy. Incorporate mint, flaxseed products, beets, and cruciferous vegetables into your meals. While they might not be the most exciting menu options, these dietary adjustments work on a biological level. They physically lower the internal friction of managing your urges, making it easier to stay focused on your daily tasks. As we look back at the daily planner, notice the evening window from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. This is the highest risk period for relapsing into detrimental habits. Without structure, evening isolation and boredom create the perfect environment for racy thoughts to surface. We eliminate that risk by keeping the schedule full. Book the 5 p.m. slot for social connection, grabbing dinner or a drink with a friend. This satisfies the human desire for closeness, which is often misdirected as a physical urge. Then, at 8 p.m., dedicate 30 minutes to reading an inspiring book or biography. At 8:30 p.m., you practice sexual transmutation. You take that stored physical energy and channel it directly into a creative hobby. Sit down and paint, sculpt, or write creatively. After an hour of creative output, you close the day at 9:30 p.m. with your final evening meditation. An evening engineered this way keeps you active and engaged. By consistently directing your energy towards social bonds and creative output, you leave zero mental bandwidth for unwanted thoughts before heading to sleep. Even with a perfectly planned schedule, you will eventually experience unscripted, intense physical urges. When they strike, you need immediate tactical interventions to get them out of your system. The first tool in your emergency protocol is a cold shower. The drop in temperature provides an immediate sensory shock that stimulates a major neural pathway called the vagus nerve. When you are physically aroused, your sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight response, is active. Stimulating the vagus nerve activates your parasympathetic nervous system. This is your body's relaxation network, and it physically overrides the arousal, forcing your system to calm down. The second tool is the mental turnoff. When lustful thoughts intrude, force yourself to visualize highly unappealing situations. Picture a broken sewage line, nails on a chalkboard, or blaring car horns. This instantly disrupts the thought patterns and functions as the mental equivalent of a cold shower. The final tool is phoning a friend. Calling an accountability partner who understands what you're going through allows you to verbally process feelings of vulnerability in real time, fulfilling your need for connection without compromising your goals. Having these automatic responses ready means you don't have to rely on willpower alone. You follow the protocol, neutralizing the threat and preventing a momentary weakness from destroying your long-term progress. This visual timeline is what a successful day looks like. From your 6 a.m. meditation to your 10 p.m. bedtime, every hour is accounted for. This is a complete system that provides morning trigger identification, evening energy transmutation, and a tactical emergency fallback for when things get difficult. Now it's your turn. Grab a notebook or open your calendar app and map out your own customized timeline for tomorrow. Once you have it written down, place that physical schedule in a highly visible location, like your workspace desk or your nightstand, so you are constantly reminded of the plan. Controlling physical energy begins with controlling your time. Taking authoritative command of your calendar is the first undeniable step in ensuring your daily actions align with your long-term goals. Jump onto any men's health forum today, and you'll find semen retention being treated as a polarized extreme. Half the community credits it as an absolute miracle, while the other half insists it's an outright hazard to your physical health. The warnings usually fall into 3 distinct categories. Critics argue that holding onto semen dramatically increases your risk of prostate cancer, that the practice itself qualifies as a psychological disorder, and that it creates a dangerous, destructive mania. Yet, for thousands of years, Taoist and Tantric practitioners treated intentional retention as a pragmatic method for increasing sustained endurance and cognitive clarity. So how does a biological practice used for centuries to drive human performance suddenly get classified by modern society as a medical and psychological threat? This gap between perspectives comes down to a direct misunderstanding in modern medicine about how biological energy actually flows through the human body. To sort the science from the stigma, we have to stop viewing retained semen as a dangerous bodily bottleneck. We need to look at it for what it biologically is: a raw, reallocatable resource. The most common physical fear surrounding retention is straightforward. If you don't expel semen, it stagnates in the body, damages the prostate gland, and it eventually causes cancer. This widespread claim almost entirely stems from a single study conducted in 2016, which suggested that men who ejaculate less frequently have a higher risk of developing the disease. Looking at this diagram, a critical flaw emerges. The study shows correlation, not causation. Men with low ejaculation often have poor underlying health driving this risk. Biologically, the stagnation theory fails because the body breaks down and recycles unused semen into systemic energy. The fear of prostate cancer ultimately acts as a misplaced fear of physical stagnation, ignoring the human body's highly efficient natural recycling system. But the medical pushback goes beyond physical health. If a healthy man intentionally chooses not to ejaculate, modern clinical manuals technically classify that behavior as a sexual disorder. This label exists because the Western medical paradigm tends to treat human health in isolated silos, rigidly separating physical bodily functions from the mind and the spirit. By contrast, Eastern philosophies built their retention practices on an integrated model. Looking at this illustration on the right, rather than treating the body, mind, and spirit as disconnected blocks, these traditions view all 3 as a single, unified energy system. The real-world consequence of this clinical fragmentation is severe social friction. Men who adopt the practice face extreme stigma, ostracization, and vicious rumors. Because people tend to react to the unknown with gut fear rather than rational inquiry, practitioners are often advised to keep the choice strictly private or carefully educate only their closest family members. Ultimately, the disorder label isn't based on documented biological damage. It is a byproduct of a clinical gap, specifically the lack of long-term study and a medical refusal to integrate the psychological and spiritual components of sexual function. That brings us to the third and final myth, the warning that semen retention generates a restless, aggressive, and unhinged mania in men. There is a grain of truth here. This restless tension becomes a very real threat, but only under one specific condition: if a practitioner aggressively bottles up his biological urge without giving that stored energy a new destination. The entire practice hinges on what is known as semen transmutation. As defined here, it is the active redirection of biological drive away from physical release and directly into creative or professional output. The danger is never the retained energy itself. The danger is attempting to accumulate a massive biological resource while failing to establish an active vector for its release. Transmutation requires a conscious, daily application. Instead of allowing sexual urges to dictate your routine, you replace the active physical expulsion with deeply focused, productive tasks. That raw biological drive gets reallocated. The tension that would normally push you toward sexual release is instead spent writing a chapter of a book, painting, or planning a complex business move. Applying this discipline creates a social bypass. Successfully transmuting the energy entirely eliminates the need to argue with detractors over clinical labels or medical textbooks. When friends and family observe a sudden, undeniable spike in your professional output and personal stamina, their skepticism naturally fades. The results do the explaining for you. In this framework, retention is a system for reallocating biological energy toward professional achievement, spiritual stability, and the physical stamina required to maintain both. Deep beneath almost every choice we make is a single, powerful driver, the subconscious desire to successfully mate. This biological imperative produces a massive amount of raw, creative energy within us. Alternative and traditional practitioners have known for thousands of years that you don't have to spend that energy the moment it appears. Ancient Taoist and Tantric texts mapped out a practice of holding on to it, which forms the basis of the 30-day Semen Retention Challenge. Before we begin the protocol, you need two things. First, get a physical 30-day calendar for tracking. Second, choose one specific goal to focus on. This can be a professional project, a fitness target, or a spiritual pursuit. We set this target because sexual energy is highly cyclical. When you choose to consciously hold on to this force rather than needlessly expending it, you build a reservoir of fuel. Directing that reserve toward your chosen goal creates a firm foundation for measurable success. Look at this diagram. While the ultimate goal of retention is a 90-day reset, we are strictly isolating our focus to phase 1, the first 30 days. Take the calendar you gathered earlier and explicitly mark out day 1 through day 30. The most common reason people fail this practice is by staring at the full 90-day mountain on day 1. For now, those remaining 60 days are completely off-limits in your mind. This tight, initial window operates as a specialized tool. You are training your brain in the habit of energy redirection, which requires strict, short-term boundaries to master. To enforce this habit, place your marked tracking system on a wall or desk where you will see it every single day of the month. By shrinking your focus down to a tight 30-day gauntlet, you turn an overwhelming lifestyle change into a highly executable daily checklist. With the timeline set, the real test begins internally. At some point during these 30 days, you will experience a sudden, intense onset of primal instinct. Think of this sudden urge as a wild dragon. It is chaotic, powerful, and it arrives without warning. When it hits, actively acknowledge its presence. Trying to suppress or ignore the dragon is ineffective and often makes the chaotic energy stronger. Instead, remember that seminal energy is cyclical. Biology designed it to circulate throughout your entire nervous system. The critical moment happens when you consciously pivot that intense, crashing urge away from immediate release and steer it directly toward your chosen goal. Once you steer it, use it. Immediately put that freshly redirected force into actionable work on your business, your fitness routine, or your creative project. Mastering this redirection protocol provides a moment of choice. It is the practice of moving from an instinctual response to a deliberate, planned action. As you manage the psychological side, you need to actively monitor your body for physical milestones. This animation demonstrates what happens internally. As you progress through the month, your body retains phosphorus, sending it up the spinal pathway to feed the brain. Zinc follows the exact same path. When it joins the phosphorus, it compounds the effect on your nervous system. This specific combination of chemical fuel gives your brain the resources it needs to operate with sharper mental clarity and faster problem-solving skills. Looking at this chart, you can see the hormonal shift. Holding on to seminal energy directly raises your baseline testosterone levels. Physically, that elevated testosterone translates into higher daily energy and an accelerated capacity to build muscle. Paying attention to these shifts is vital. When motivation naturally dips after the first week, these tangible changes provide the evidence you need to keep going. Actively validating these physical changes proves to your brain that the system is working, and that proof is what sustains your discipline for the full month. When you finally reach day 30, sit down in a quiet space with a notebook or journal for a formal review. This is the checklist you need to evaluate. You will measure 5 distinct metrics: your energy levels, your body composition, your motivation, how others relate to you socially, and your overall feelings. Don't guess or rely on. Creating a physical record of your transformation gives you the definitive, measurable proof you need to justify pushing forward. Completing these 30 days and finalizing your review marks a significant shift. You've proven you can gain control over a powerful natural drive, replacing a reactive lifestyle with a sense of internal stability and confidence. Review your documented results. Use that undeniable evidence of your progress to confidently commit to Phase 2, completing the remainder of the 90-day challenge. Mastering your biology provides a foundation of clarity. It gives you the ability to direct your focus toward whatever goals you choose to achieve next.